Hello and welcome to Insiders, a podcast all about the world of television with me, Jimmy Mulville.
And me, Peter Fincham.
This is the podcast for people who love television and want to find out a bit more about what goes on behind the scenes.
And we're delighted to be joined this week by, dare I say it, an actual broadcaster, a professional broadcaster. Amol Rajan,
Unlike you and me.
Unlike you and me, who looks, I might say, remarkably bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, from a man who consistently gets up at 3 a.m. to present the Today programme on Radio 4 and has a 2-year-old as well. That
Not just
like
a 2-year-old.
Hell of a combination.
Isn't this a parenting podcast? Because all of us have got 4 children.
Yes,
Yeah,
I noticed
we've
that.
got them at slightly different life stages, though.
Are you saying you're
But
older
we
than
can
me?
share
Should we
experiences.
tell people who this is, this mystery voice?
The mystery. I've just
He's
said
already done
Amol
it.
Rajan.
Jimmy, do you
Did
know
you?
what, mate? You need to be much more engaged at the top of your own podcast.
You know what?
You need to deliver it with feeling.
I missed the Amol Rajan bit.
It was literally 40% of what you just said.
Honestly, I was so concentrated on saying, don't miss out his name. And I obviously was
I
listening
thought I was
to the wrong
coming to
bit.
meet two icons
I
of
tell you
modern
what, I'll
media.
continue with Amol's
Amol,
intro.
let me just get you
Giants, you know?
It's like being in a care home.
I know.
Just think you're visiting a care home, and it's part of your community outreach.
I'm going to continue with the intro. Alongside his Today duties, Amol also is a presenter, as we all know, of University Challenge,
Yes.
The hit BBC podcast Radical, and his own interview show, which has the pleasingly Ron Seal title of Amol Rajan Interviews. And all that alone would, of course, be more than enough for us to have him on the podcast. But earlier this year, he announced he was leaving the Today programme. He was going to unleash his inner entrepreneur and jump into the great digital Narnia of the creator economy. Sounds very exciting. Welcome to the great digital Narnia of the creator economy.
Yeah, I'm
Are we in that,
honoured.
Jim? I suppose
Honoured.
we are.
You are Narnia. This is what Narnia looks like. A small blue room in
Very
North
blue.
London.
Yeah.
You know that one of
Be a
the
wardrobe.
absolutely fundamental rules of like the creator economy is that you have to care what you look like, yeah?
Yeah,
Yes.
And you are in a room with no art in a dingy basement with 2 pot plants.
yeah.
And you're meant
I
to
wouldn't
be
refer to-
icons of modern media, innovators, entrepreneurs,
I know.
bastions of social mobility, and here we are. Anyway,
I wouldn't refer to our 2 producers as pot plants, by the way. I think that is immediately offensive. When are you leaving the BBC?
I'm not leaving
You're not
till...
leaving the BBC. You're
No,
leaving.
well, no, when are you
Thank you
leaving
very
the
much,
Today
indeed,
programme?
Peter. There's a guy who's worked at the
I've
BBC.
read
understands
my
distinction.
briefing notes, Jimmy.
I know. When are you leaving the Today programme?
Probably towards the end of the summer. So
Okay.
late August, early September.
Is it
and-
unusual for someone of your age to leave the Today programme?
I mean, I've done 5 years. I've had a wonderful time. The Today programme slightly undermines my thesis about why I should leave because it's such a big and influential beast. And I know it's a podcast about TV, and so we shouldn't talk about radio programmes, but the real story about
We
the
very
Today
rarely
programme-
talk about TV on this podcast.
I know.
I wouldn't worry about
talk
it.
about life in a care home. I
Yeah, it
get
really
the
is.
impression. But I mean, the Today programme is absolutely astonishing beast, which 5.6 or 5.7 million different Homo sapiens listen to every week, which is amazing. Which is why it's a bit mad to leave it. So maybe I'm a little bit young, but I think you set up this podcast because actually we live in interesting times, and things are moving rather fast, and I want to be where the action's at.
Let's say it'd be lovely. Obviously, let's come on to your plans and this sort of joining the creator economy and the hidden entrepreneur, etc. But I'd love to kind of talk about the BBC. We always talk about the BBC on this podcast, and to be honest, it's probably our favourite subject. But you, as somebody who's I know you started out in the right show on Channel 5, but pretty much your broadcasting career is a BBC broadcasting career. You're very, very closely associated with BBC. You will continue on University Challenge and I'm sure other things. The BBC always feels that it's at a crossroads, at a sort of moment with existential threats, whether they're from, from governments or whether they're from Netflix or whatever. How does it look to you at this moment when you're kind of loosening your ties with it? Let's put it that way.
This time is different. Time is different. And it's different because the internet happened. And I can tell you the future of the BBC, and I say it's, in a room full of people who basically believe this is a golden institution, one of the best things about Britain, one of the jewels of our culture and country. Yeah. In a word, the BBC's future is smaller. It's smaller in absolute terms, and it's smaller in relative terms. I actually think its importance grows exponentially because of some prevailing trends. The kind of prevalence of news you can't really trust, the fact that we live in a very polarised society and having a village pump where people come together for these national moments, I think that all becomes more important. The BBC becomes more important. It also becomes more important in the future for economic reasons, because the BBC is basically the centre still of the creative economy here, or the creative industries, and powers it. So I think the BBC is more and more and more important, but it's going to get smaller. And this time is different because of the technology. And I think previous crises over the Iraq War, or when, Marmaduke Hussey was leading the BBC, were kind of mostly political crises. And it's true to say that the political environment might be less friendly than it has been for a long time. But in the end, the BBC has lost its control of our attention because the media landscape has changed and fewer people feel that they need to pay for a license fee.
Yes.
I've got a book on my shelf at home. It's an old paperback, and it's called The Last Days of the Beeb by a man called Michael Leakman. It was published in 1989.
89, right. Yeah.
So the notion that the BBC is about to fall off a cliff or is on the edge of a precipice is a familiar one, and there are many ways in which you could see problems coming at it. But if we accept that as years go by, the licence fee in its current form becomes harder to defend and more anachronistic, how do you fund the BBC?
I don't know that it is harder to defend, actually. I think you have to start with a prior argument. So two things. One is that I don't think these are the last days of the BBC. When I say that, I'm saying something very specific, which is I think the BBC's future, in relative and absolute terms, is smaller. But I don't think it's going to disappear. I think it'll be around for decades. And I think, hopefully if it's cherished by smart people in Whitehall, which is a big ask, and there's no evidence of that happening recently, it will continue to thrive. But above all, it will thrive because it's got a connection to the public. I think there's a very strong argument for a license fee style funding of it, but it requires an argument for something prior, which is the existence of something you call the public domain. And I think really the arguments over the future funding of the BBC are technical arguments about something bigger and more important, which is what do we want our shared space to look like? Should there be a point, as there is with, for instance, the NHS, and this is Mark Thompson's argument really, should there be a space where in the domain of what you broadly call culture or information, people are treated equally, the dustman and the duke, the prince and the pauper, and people come together and they're asked to pay a compulsory fee for something which they benefit from. It's like a contribution to a public fund. And they'll only do that if they have two things. One is they get something for that contribution, and two is they believe in the broader thing they're contributing to. And so I think you have to try and make a new, fresh argument for public funding of the BBC. And you could reform the licence fee in lots of ways. For instance, you could make it part of existing tax, like the council tax. In Germany, they've got something called the Rundfunkbeitrag, which is kind of household tax, so you could try and fold it into that. But that requires political courage. Because I'm glad we got Rundfunkbeitrag in the first few minutes of this podcast. That requires political courage, because that requires people in central government who are making difficult arguments about public service cuts to have the courage and skill to prosecute a political argument for contribution. And that's very hard to do.
If you have it funded out of general taxation, does it retain its independence in quite the same way? You probably saw last week BBC's response to the Green Paper suggested that you don't have charter renewal. You have a rolling
take it out of
charter.
politics. Yeah, you take it out. You take it out of this crazy political kind of.
Do you think it's a good idea?
I think it's weird that the BBC is abnormal in its Royal Charter, and it is this political football more than other things that are submitted to Royal Charter. A and B. If you just think the time that I had this other previous career between the right stuff and the BBC of working for nearly a decade in newspapers. When I turned up at the BBC in 2016, I was the BBC's first what they call media editor.
Yeah.
So I covered media and tech. And in my 6 years as media editor, it was a time of unusual political turmoil in Britain. I think I had 7 culture secretaries. By the end, I do remember this guy called Jeremy Wright, lovely guy, lawyer apparently, conservative.
No.
He was culture secretary for a while. I was on a panel with him once at a press conference, and I said to him, "All due respect, Jeremy, should I bother interviewing you? Because there'll be another culture secretary along in a minute." And he was very upset at this impertinent question from a BBC hack. And then his civil servants got in touch with me and said, "This is absolutely outrageous. How dare you do this?" And then other civil servants got in touch with me and said, "Actually, you're on something." And about a week later, there was a different culture secretary. There has been a very, very, very messy approach to the future of the BBC from governments of all hues over the past decade. And I feel like there has been a review of the licence fee. There's been consultations forever and after. course, you want to try and reduce the exposure to political volatility, right?
But why do we find ourselves always apologising to the BBC? Is
I'm
that
not.
no? But no. I'm
Yeah.
saying, but politicians, they feel there's a sense of embarrassment about funding the BBC when it's very cheap to fund the BBC. I never got over the fact that it's like 50p a day. Why aren't the BBC basically getting out there and saying this is cheap? This service is very cheap.
When I was a media editor, I used to actually go through, because it's unbelievably tedious, but I was paid really handsomely to do it. Go through the footnotes of the annual report and you find what's called efficiency savings, a phrase that Gordon Brown used to use quite a lot. If you go up to the 7th floor of New Broadcasting House at the BBC, you'll find on a desk with 6 people, someone who's responsible for EastEnders, which is watched by millions of people, sat next to someone who's responsible for a programme that no one ever talks about called Death in Paradise. You know Death in Paradise? Death in Paradise is watched by about 5 million people.
Yeah.
Never gets talked about in the pages of various newspapers. And they're sat next to someone who is the person responsible for another programme called Call the Midwife.
Yeah.
These are massive national institutions, and they're kind of organised. The amount of money the BBC spends on them is actually quite low.
When I was at the BBC, I found quite quickly, because I joined it from outside, and I was not a BBC insider, and I realised quite quickly that BBC is very uncomfortable when it talks about money and the cost of things. So there
That's
was a
very
gauge.
English, though, isn't it?
Well, it's not just an Englishness. There was a gauge called cost per viewer hour that you could apply to any programme. So I can tell you on BBC One, this is in the mid-2000s, I can remember which programme was the best value cost per viewer hour on the whole BBC One.
Can we guess?
Yeah, go on, guess.
New tricks?
No.
Regional news?
No.
Bargain hunt?
Yeah. Antiques Roadshow.
Antiques.
Antiques Roadshow.
Yeah.
Huge audience.
So it's 6.5 million back then.
Yeah.
6.5 million cost tuppence halfpenny to make, as it were. When I discovered this, as somebody who just joined the BBC,
Yeah.
I said, well, why aren't we out there making this point? And they said, oh, we can't do that. We can't do that. Because the minute we say that Antiques Roadshow is got the best cost per viewer hour,
Yes.
they're going to say what's got the worst. And then we're going to come to things like expensive dramas that nobody watches but are winning BAFTA awards and are interesting. And it's it was a sort of feeling of once you've lifted the curtain and the light shines in, you can't turn it off again.
Can I make some points that'll get me in trouble?
Please do.
I think Tim Davie
Mm.
is a world-class CEO
Mm.
who has been a fantastic leader at the BBC and who is going to be very hard to replace, almost certainly be replaced by someone inferior. Who, by the way, is going to, I'm sure, go off and make huge amounts of money to do a lot less work and have a lot less stress. And if I was to make one criticism of his reign, it's that because the BBC, and we should say, does cock up constantly,
Yeah.
has been mired in huge amounts of scandals, but often things that aren't Tim Davie's fault. I do think that over recent years, there's been a kind of reticence about really going out to the public and making the argument for the successes. The trouble is, there's a sort of almost siege mentality, and the siege mentality is to some extent justified by the fact that there are a constant drip of cock-ups.
No, I think
And
there's another.
scandals,
I
genuine
agree.
scandals.
All that's true, but I think there's another reason. And do you know that thing in Private Eye, trebles all round?
Yeah.
I've always had this feeling about the BBC, which is a little bit like the royal family, that because the public pays for it, the public doesn't want the BBC to look too comfortable. No newspaper will ever mind a headline that says "Red faces at the BBC." BBC crisis talks in the BBC, another cock up at the BBC, partly because their readers sort of think we pay for it, so let's see them sweating a little bit for their money.
But,
So if all the BBC did was say, because I agree with you on one level, but if all the BBC did was say, we're absolutely marvellous, we
No,
do
they would never
wonderful
it.
things.
I would just turn the
I
dial.
don't think it's
I
as
would just
binary as
turn
that,
the
is it?
dial a little bit up
Yeah.
on some of the achievements in a subtle but confident way. Just make the point that there are things that people watch. So, for instance, there's a particular trope. This is to do with the Today programme, right? Which is that quite a lot of the people who have it in for the BBC perform the same intellectual error, which is that they listen to the Today programme, they listen to a question me or one of the other presenters did or didn't ask at 8:10, and they extrapolate from that to some generalised criticism
Yes.
of the BBC, overlooking the fact that for most people, the BBC is strictly, it's the weather, it's the travel on
It's
the
David
A380,
Attenborough.
It's
Yeah.
David Attenborough,
Yeah.
and the other thing which is completely overlooked is it's local.
Couldn't agree more.
Why are you leaving?
I want to talk about you and your plans now, because you've got, you know, plans that to us look very interesting, because you're starting a company and you want to become an entrepreneur. I say want to become, that makes it sound as if, you know, becoming an astronaut or whatever. Anybody become an entrepreneur, start a company, you are an entrepreneur. What's led you to want to make that change, rather than, if you like, continue down the maybe more traditional line of saying, I present this program, present that program, maybe I'll get offered this one, I'll stop doing this one. You know, a straightforward, if you like, presenter's life. I'm just really interested in the kind of thinking in your head about that.
So I'll give you a really, 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 really honest answer, which is that I want to fight decline. And there's a massive, massive exemption and caveat to this, which is the Today programme, which is actually not in huge decline and is a massive beast. But the story of my career, and I only say this because, you know, you asked me about me. Story of my career is a kind of 20 years of disaster tourism. And I've never been, I'm 42, and I've never really worked anywhere growing or profitable. That's quite weird. And I spent 10 years in newspapers, and I had an amazing time. I fell in love with newspapers. I got to have an incredible decade in newspapers. There aren't that many. If you could work in newspapers, it'd be a wonderful.
You ended up being an editor at 29, didn't you?
Yeah, you want to be an editor. And to be honest, there's no other paper I'd have wanted to edit. The Independent, which I really believed in. I started buying it when the visionary and legendary Simon Kellner turned it into a compact or tabloid and took it against the Iraq War. And I got to be editor. That was amazing. But it was tough. And in the end, the Independent shut as a print paper. It's now a hugely successful digital product. But that was tough, and it was decline. It was union battles. It was savings. It was redundancies. It was an atmosphere of gloom, despite the fact we did something incredibly heroic, and God, I'm so proud of what we did. And I went from that to the BBC, and the BBC is much bigger. And if you're going to work in TV and radio in the UK, the BBC is kind of where it's at, but the BBC is getting smaller. And I kind of, you know, I'm 42. There's a kind of little bit of a push factor, which is that it's not great having 4 young kids and extreme insomnia and do the Today programme, but that's a small thing. I'd always want to caveat that by saying that the producers who work on the Today programme have it much harder than me. Absolute heroes. They work 12-hour overnight shifts. But I just want to go to where the action is at, where the audience is, where the attention is, where the power is, and where the ambition is. And I would say, if you think about your distinguished career, just before we start recording, we were getting nostalgic about 1960s Liverpool, Jimmy.
Yeah.
If you think about when you guys started out, I would say one of the great blessings, and I'm sure you're self-conscious enough to know this, is that you were where the action was at. And you were at the height of your powers, as you still are now, when you were at the height of your powers and in places where media was controlled from. When you ran ITV, Peter, or BBC One, when you came out with Have I Got News For You, or even when you guys started on, whatever it was, Injury Time, or doing, you know, Alan Partridge. Alan Partridge was the biggest thing anywhere. It was huge. May not have felt it at the time, but you were where the action was at. And today, the action is spread in lots and lots of different places. It's fragmenting, but it's possible to use digital technology to grow a really big following and build digital communities. And I don't know how many people listening to this amazing podcast have heard of KB Lame, who's the world's biggest TikToker. Just done $1 billion deal. Or how many people have heard of Mr. Beast, who's the biggest person on YouTube. These people are absolute giants, not famous in an old conventional way, but they have 160 million followers. And I like the idea of having a third career, having had a lot of fun in newspapers and a lot of fun in linear TV and radio, of trying to unleash.
It occurs to me, Amol, that you're in a little kind of set that includes James Harding, who I'm sure you know, who was the editor of the Times, went to the BBC, head of news, now runs Tortoise.
Fantastic human being.
And I'm doing some panel with him soon about, guess what, the future of the BBC. I know him well. And then, of course, very recently we've had an announcement from Piers Morgan, who, you know, in a sense exists in a very different part of the forest to you. Not a BBC person at all.
Well,
but I know, actually, I commissioned his first programmes on BBC One, but he's much more of an ITV person in his conventional television career, though no longer an ITV. Newspaper editor, television presenter, and he's now starting his own company.
So I'm basically playing 20 years catch up to Piers Morgan.
No. I'm
and that
saying,
absolute rascal,
I'm saying
he
when
beat
you see,
me. I'm going to be the youngest ever newspaper editor, except for Piers.
But there are
He beat me
similarities.
Listen,
I mean-
I've got. Can I just say my most controversial opinion? This
Yeah.
is going to get in massive trouble, and you can put this out on the internet, guys. It's going to. I like Piers Morgan.
Yeah.
I really, really like him. I'm going to go further than that. This is to get me cancelled.
All right.
I respect him.
Yeah.
I respect him intellectually.
Mm-hmm.
I respect him journalistically, and I respect the fact that throughout his career, and by the way, he's a person. People that you never know someone from their public profile. Piers Morgan is a man who will shock a lot of people and definitely get me cancelled. Capable of immense kindness, and that never comes across in his kind of bolshiness. But he's an incredibly, incredibly kind person when he wants to be. One of the things that I think is underestimated or underregarded about Piers is he's always been where the action is at. At the end of the 1990s and early noughties, when tabloid newspapers in Britain ran Britain, he was at the summit.
Yeah.
In the late noughties, when talent shows of the kinds you guys brilliantly commissioned, especially in America, were kind of dominating the world and getting audiences of the tens of millions, he was on the biggest one of them all. He was on America's Got Talent, taken over to that Hollywood lot by his friend Simon Cowell. He then had this funny interregnum with Good Morning Britain, where he kind of made a lot of noise and was successful. And now, again, he's where the action's at, because he's gone to YouTube, and we're speaking shortly after he signed a huge, huge, huge deal with a bunch of investors, and credit to him. And I think he's got flaws, Piers, don't get me wrong, and he has this tendency to slightly overdo it and spin out of control. But he has this knack for being where the attention is. He likes the attention.
So
and yes, he is something of a model.
So can I ask you then specifically, you're about to set up this
Production company.
So
I like Empire of Ideas and IP.
well, it's very funny because when we set up Hattrick in 1986, we literally had one idea, which we did.
Which was?
It was called Chelmsford 123.
How'd it go?
It was a comedy that was set in ancient Britain.
Has a very good cast.
It was starring. It was written
Riff
by
Rhys Jones?
It was written
No,
by
no,
Rory
no.
McGrath,
Rory
and,
McGrath.
and myself, because I did classics at university.
He was in it.
I did classics at a Liverpool Comprehensive in the 1960s, and that school now doesn't have a sixth form. I just want to say that it's
You're a paragon of social mobility.
it's 50 years later, and that neighbourhood's gone backwards. Anyway,
Do you do reunions for all you Cambridge rascals?
No.
from
We
50
go on
years?
holiday together. We go on holiday
Peter and-
with the group of friends. who
Rory
we were-
McGrath,
well, yeah,
Riff Rhys
we-
Jones.
Clive
Clive
Anderson,
Anderson,
Clive
me and
Anderson.
Jimmy. We go on holiday.
we call it
go
Walking with
on-
Dinosaurs.
Yeah. Good title, isn't it?
This year we didn't go walking. We actually went boating because Rory's got a bit of a dodgy hip, so we went on a boat in Provence, and Peter crashed it.
I crashed it. It was a big boat, and we were going through this. We don't really need to hear this, do we? We were going through this little ancient brick kind of bridge, and I rammed in the side of the bridge.
You were rowing these five.
That wasn't
No,
rowing.
Rose. It was a
wasn't
gin palace.
rowing. No,
It was
I
a ho-
just
it was a kind of-
steering.
It was an expensive.
It was.
I've got this picture of you on the
It wa- it
cab.
wasn't-
No, we were all
I've got this
dressed-
picture of you on the cab
It
in
wasn't that
1978.
expensive.
No, we
it
were-
was like the equivalent of a kind of
So
motorhome or
let's
caravan.
get back to this man's.
No, we should. I want
No,
to
we've
career.
got to paint a picture
I know
here.
you're
So-
painting a very nice picture.
so
I'm
this-
jealous of your picture. Do you know the answer to all your questions comes back to the same thing? You guys,
Yeah.
you've had these extraordinarily successful, brilliant careers, and I'm gonna be nice about you. You guys are, part of the reason for coming here is because
Yeah.
you guys are absolute giants of this industry, as well as doing this great podcast. And you have been there where the big decisions were being made, and at times when millions and millions and millions of people were watching your stuff. And I think I would just invite you to recognise, even for someone like me who's had a wonderfully fun career, I sit here as a humble person who's
You
had
just
a great
started
time.
as well.
Just started, but you know what?
Yeah.
I'm bored of missing golden ages.
Yeah.
And you guys are the golden ages.
but
made
I
flesh.
actually-
You're the golden age of the 80s, you're
Yeah.
the golden age of the 90s, and actually the golden age of the noughties.
But not the current decade. Fair enough. But I do want to say one thing about that, because we can now see with hindsight that when Jimmy and Denise O'Donoghue and his partners were building up Hattrick, and when I was building up Talkback,
We didn't know what we were doing.
We didn't know what we were doing.
Of course, and I don't know what I'm doing.
But that's
the glory
what
of
I
it.
want to get to.
That's, and look, you've got to be humble. Look, I'm here on my third or fourth career as a founder. I've got huge ideas.
Oh,
and
you're going to
plans.
be fine,
And,
Amol. I can
and you
tell
know
that.
what? I realise you got to approach it with conscientiousness, ruthlessness, focus, rigor. I'm extremely hardworking. Do you know what? What I plan to do might look nothing like what I'm doing in 3 years' time.
Correct.
But
Almost
when
certainly.
you
Yeah.
when you start out Action is information, and you just try it. So what I'm planning to do, since you very kindly
Yes.
asked,
What specifically?
I want
are you
to
doing?
take the podcast which I currently do at the BBC, which will probably change in some
Radical?
format. Radical, yes.
Very good.
I'm going to work out whether it is that or it's something else with a slightly different name, but I want to own it. And I want to own a podcast which becomes a quote-unquote podcast,
Yes.
also known as a chat show, a YouTube show.
Yes.
And it'll be twice weekly. I'll be doing daily stuff on
Excellent.
YouTube as well. And basically, you build a YouTube audience.
You will.
And on YouTube, I understand from years looking at it, that's the weird things. I've seen all these trends. I've just not been able to jump into them. It takes a long time. You're flat for a long time. It's hard to monetize through advertising. It's hard to monetize through subscriptions. It might be easier in the beginning to monetize through sponsorship. And I'm having a lot of very, very exciting conversations about that. And I want to do that on YouTube. I also want to do live events, which I really love. Live events are incredibly exhilarating. I really enjoy them.
Yeah.
And you know what? People enjoy them. It's one of the things you can't get, the AI is never going to replace live events. And one of the things that people love about live events is that feeling of being in the same room as someone who has been pouring into their ears. That electricity of that sort of moment of connection, even if you don't get to meet them, that sense that I was there. And I love the idea of doing that. And I have a particular thing, which is I'm also writing a book, which is, about basically this mad age we live in. It's actually about social mobility, Jimmy. And artificial
That's my
intelligence.
favourite thing.
Yes, mine too. I made many documentaries about it, and I set up a charity years ago, which tries to help kids from really screwed up backgrounds get on in the world. And I want to take all these things around Britain's universities. So it's YouTube, Substack, events, books, and I'll still be doing Britain's longest running TV quiz. So I'm not severing ties with the BBC completely. But you know what? Listen, you've got to be humble about this stuff. I don't know how you felt when you set up Talkback. I don't know if you knew if Alan Partridge was going to be a massive hit, or you knew that years down the line you're going to come up with the greatest satirical weekly quiz of all time. Who knows?
I kind of, you've been very flattering to us, but to kind of send it back in your direction, I think Jimmy and I, because we've been doing this a very long time, we meet people who say, I think you're setting up a company. And I don't know if you find this, Jimmy. When I'm in that conversation,
I know what you're going to say.
I'm partly listening to their business plan. I'm partly listening to the equity structure they've got in mind, the investment they need. But I'm more looking straight at them and thinking,
Are they
have
up for
you
it?
got what it takes?
Mission.
Which is a sort of, it's hard to define, but you need a certain resilience. You need a positivity. You need a kind of, you need to energize other people in a sense of we can do this.
It's
I
zeal.
can do this.
You need zeal.
Yeah.
And I like the idea.
What I was going to say is, you've got all that.
Oh, that's very kind.
But then so's Piers, actually. When I read that Piers, and I agree with you about Piers, by the way, my children, when they want to wind me up or really put me down, one thing they'll sometimes
every
say
day,
to
really,
me is,
isn't it?
yeah, but one of
Quite
those,
right.
one of the things that they can really get at me is saying, you're a friend of Piers Morgan, aren't you? And they think that's something I should be absolutely ashamed of.
thing I'd say to
and
your
I say
children-
to them, well, I don't know if I'm a friend because we're professional acquaintances, but I dealt with Piers for 10, 15 years as a channel controller and what have you. Got on very well with him, liked him, thought he was a very clever, very smart guy.
Yeah.
He is.
He's got it. You've got it. And I think this is, in a sense, what I find quite interesting, that in another generation, on-screen people didn't tend to think, I can start a company on Empire, I can do that. Of course you can.
But the barriers to entry are much lower now, in one sense, but also the potential audience, although monetizing that audience is hard, the potential audience is much bigger. On your thing about zeal, Jeff Bezos has got this wonderful distinction. He says, when people come to him for investment, he says to himself, are these people missionaries or are they mercenaries?
Yes.
Right? Are they sort of out to make a buck? And by the way, I intend to make, and in fact, I'm pretty confident with all due humility, I will make in 5, 7, 10 years a shit ton of money.
Yes.
And I want to. And do you know why I want to? It's because while my mum's still around, I want to do this thing that I didn't do for my dad before he died, and I kind of hate myself for it. I want to say to her, Mum, you're going to get on that plane, you're going to turn left.
Yeah.
Right? I don't give a flying toss about houses, but I've got a mission, and the mission is to build something.
Yeah.
And I like buildings. And it's funny. I think a lot of people haven't realised when I was making my pompous announcement that Del Boy was my inspiration growing up. Now that's true because he was, and he's a huge. It was kind of ironic because the thing about Del Boy is like he always failed, didn't get anywhere, but he had fun trying. And Del Boy was a good soul who had fun trying, and he brought people with him, and he got there in the end. He walks into the sunset saying, this time next year we'll be billionaires. And the point is to throw yourself at it, to do it in a conscientious, strategic way, to have a sense of mission, to build something, and to lead. And I enjoy leadership.
And also, ironically, isn't it? It's that what you're doing is, and you're right, I think, is to head in that direction. Is part of the problem that the BBC has, that we started this conversation with, is that more and more people now are watching their content on a big screen on YouTube.
Yeah, and I'm not sure there's much that the BBC can do about that, right?
No.
You know, it's like
Netflix are worried about YouTube, not just the BBC.
Oh,
Everybody's worried about YouTube.
Netflix versus YouTube is the TV battle of our time. You know, it is. I had the pleasure of chatting to Ted Sarandos the other day on the Today programme. One of the things I miss about the Today programme, by the way, is that on the Saturday I interviewed Gordon Brown for 20 minutes about Peter Manson.
Yeah.
On the Monday I was interviewing Ted Sarandos, and you're like, you know, but Ted Sarandos is very clear. YouTube is their main rival, and Netflix versus YouTube is, I think, the primary battle for television, by which I mean people watching things on a mid-sized screen or maybe a small screen. There's a much, much broader thing, which is the battle for attention, which is TikTok and LinkedIn and Spotify and all that stuff. And it's war. It's war, and the BBC's got to find its place in that.
Yeah, because the thing that we talk less about, because we talk about YouTube a lot and about Netflix, the thing we talk less about and is about the battle between screens. In other words, we were brought up in our generation. You're a younger generation, but I doubt it was that different to think that telly meant a box in the corner of the
black and white one
of the room. Well, you don't go back to black and white days, Amol. But basically, it meant a corner. In the family watched the television. Now we've still got big televisions, but we've got laptops, we've got phones, and phones in a way are the winners of this.
Totally.
But all that you're describing in your plans sound to me like things you can 100% watch on a phone.
Oh, and you can, I mean, I think the distinction between a podcast, even this exalted experience, and what, you know, we used to think of as an expensive chat show, it's kind of just falling away.
Yeah.
Maybe a chat show had a live audience sometimes, you know, you could play in that noise if you wanted to. But one of the glorious things about podcasts is if you listen to them in audio form, you feel this sense of belonging or membership. You feel it kind of belongs to you in the moment. And it's a very one-to-one connection. If I could just have a tiny, slightly annoying detour in modern sociology. In 1995, Robert Putnam, great American sociologist, wrote a seminal essay which turned into a book 5 years later called Bowling Alone. And Bowling Alone was about how the rise of television had led to the collapse of American civic society. Basically, voluntary clubs, sports societies, all this sort of thing. We all went from playing outside to watching that box in the corner. And I think, and that Bowling Alone, huge bestseller, came out 4 years before the iPhone. And we've gone from the, you know, playing outside to the box in the corner to this individual atomized experience through our smartphones. And I think that there's something quite precious which has been lost, which is called society or civic society. But it does mean that as individuals, you can be reached in a very direct, very intimate and reciprocal way. And one of the glories of YouTube, I think more so than Netflix for a creator potentially, is you get fantastic data. And you can really have a deep connection with individuals. You can really create a sense of connection and belonging and community. And it's not the same thing as being famous in the old days when, you know, you want to, you're on Britain's Got Talent and 7 million people see you. But it's a one-to-one connection.
So who do you think your community will be in 5 years' time?
It'll be a community in the millions globally, English language speaking, intellectually curious people who feel, which is, by the way, the dominant feeling in our country today, a sense of anxiety about these overwhelming forces that are redefining our lives, technology, climate, demography, politics. You want to understand those forces and you want to know what they need to do to win the future. I think the audience for that, absolutely huge. I know it's huge because Radical is growing very, very fast. It's got an incredibly engaged and big audience. And the polling shows that that's the dominant feeling. People feel this kind of anxiety and they kind of feel this kind of, oh my God, it's all happening to me. I feel this kind of, I feel a lack of agency. And I want to give people agency and a kind of feeling that they can survive in the future.
We shall wish you luck. Is there a name for your empire yet? What are you going to call it?
No.
Okay.
I mean,
Titles are a fucking nightmare, actually.
I've got a title in mind, but I don't want to say what it is.
Okay. Well, don't worry.
I've got a name for my company and a title in mind. And actually, the future, by the way, is that this title, which has a very pleasing acronym, could be spun out to make a bunch of different podcasts. So again, I don't know what I'm going to do 3-5 years from now, but I would hope that 3-5 years from now, I have a core product, which is me, and then a fleet of other vodcast, podcasts, YouTube shows.
Fantastic.
I can't wait.
What would you do if you were me? I know I've taken a lot of your time.
I'd do what you're doing. I think that and I think what
Sounds great.
I sense from you is there's a kind
How much money do you have?
there's a kind of
You want to come aboard as a sponsor?
But honestly, Amol, when we set out, Jimmy and I have both been, very lucky, and we've been very well rewarded for what we've done. It didn't look like a route to making a lot of money when we were running these tiny companies in rooms above shops in Soho in the late 80s. It felt a bit more like we were avoiding having a proper career.
Yeah.
But how did you turn that into big cash?
I said, well, I mean, it's too long a story to tell now, but basically,
and tax people are listening.
we owe it, and we have to but Amol, we've talked about this. We owe it to the Thatcher government.
It was the only good
created
idea she had.
The 25% quota for independent productions,
Yeah.
which was in the late 80s, 87, I think. And we were running companies so small, you'd hardly call them proper companies. We were just little, as I say, room above a shop type thing. And then we just followed our noses as broadcasters needed to commission independently. So obviously the internet didn't exist, YouTube didn't exist, all these things that the world you're going into didn't exist. But there was this opportunity to make programs for the BBC or Channel 4, particularly Channel 4, great sponsors, the independent community in those days. And we kind of followed our noses. And at a certain point we thought, wow, our companies are worth something. We even 5 years before that. But
the mission came first. The creative came first.
Yeah.
When you did Alan Partridge, and by the way, I spent most of my. You should know. I say so. You can shut me up and send me out of your silly weird blue studio in a second. I spent most of my youth watching the product of your labours. Right.
No, that's really lovely to know. Yeah.
Well, it's just true. I could quote more of Alan Partridge, and trust me, I know it's.
Can I put something to you, but which I sometimes say to people, the famous scene with Alan Partridge and Tony Hayes. I'm on Alan Partridge's side.
Yeah, of course you are.
When he pitches all those programs,
yeah.
people always mention monkey tennis.
Yeah.
He actually.
That's not a bad idea.
He pitches some quite good ideas.
Monkey, yeah.
Regional detective show, nothing wrong with that, and so on. But I feel emotionally, and I think you're one of these as well. I'm with Alan because he's doing the difficult thing, which is to pitch. But I've been Tony Hayes, where you sit there with your arms folded like that, saying no, 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 and that's a great job. And I've had 2 of them, but it's easier. It's easier.
Yes.
It's more exciting, better, and more rewarding ultimately to be the creator who has to sell something.
I tell you what happened to us is that we did this show which is set in Chelmsford in 123 AD, which lasted 2 seasons. But in the meantime, I was asked to be in the radio version of Whose Line Is It Anyway, because I was an actor in those days. And I was terrible. I said hello and goodbye. I stood next to Lenny Henry, and he couldn't keep up either, because Stephen Fry and John Sessions were brilliant. But I did notice that my producer's hat on, and I didn't realise actually that I was drifting back into the producer's world, which I started at BBC Radio in 1978, is that I said to the producer, this would make a great TV show. Have you pitched it on BBC? Yeah, I sent it to the BBC 6 months ago. And I said, oh, well, I'll bring Channel 4 down next week because I'm working at Channel 4. And I brought them all down, all the entertainment department. And we sat in a BBC studio, 200 people, laughing their arse off at a BBC show. And in the room, they bought the series for Channel 4. And months later, it went out. I was in a restaurant in Soho. And I heard someone on the table next to me talking to their friend. And they said, have you seen this new show on Channel 4? It's called Whose Line Is It Anyway? It's brilliant. I thought, oh, now we might be onto something. A little while later, Alan Yentob rang us and said, we'd like something like Whose Line, but maybe a topical flavour. And Geoffrey Perkins and I, the late, great Geoffrey Perkins, was part of the group by then. There were 4 of us.
You said that, Patrick.
Yeah. And we said, no, we don't do commissions.
But
and then he said, get in the fucking room. Alan Yentob's just rung us up and was offering us a programme. Get in that room and think of an idea.
I'll just quickly say about Alan that I had you guys knew Alan very well for many, many decades. I knew him better over the last decade. And I had the enormous honour of officiating, or whatever you call it, introducing his memorial. And, there was this profile of him by a brilliant journalist at the New Yorker called Sam Knight a few years ago, which cast him as someone who, there's 2 great things. One is that Alan Yentob sort of, I think, embodied a kind of post-war place in British society where these people, I know you don't like the idea of curators or the word curator, but there were these gatekeepers who had extraordinary power. And I think that is basically gone. And the other great thing about Alan Yentob is Henry Mance, another amazing journalist at the FT, wrote a lunch with the FT in 2016 around the Rio Olympics. There was a big doping scandal. And he had one of my favourite lines of all time where he said, if name dropping were an Olympic sport, Yentov would be accused of doping.
Yeah, I know that.
He really, honestly.
Listen, I was a very close friend of Alan and miss him, and we'll miss him forever,
Absolutely.
forever. But I think there's an interesting thing to say here, in as much as a comparison between Alan's career and yours. They're very different in other ways. But you've both been off-screen and on-screen. But he, in a sense, saw his entire arc of his career as happily being at the BBC. You would sometimes get with Alan, he'll say,
to his own detriment
I've been talking to somebody who might invest in the thing that I might do.
Yeah, he was so committed.
You knew deep down he would never do it because the BBC, BBC was written through him like a stick of Brighton rock.
And he joined the World Service in 1968.
And he embodied the BBC. He was the most, wonderful sponsor of talent, of creativity,
but
and
I'd say
everything.
this: he was a maverick inside the BBC, and that's what I think the BBC was very good at.
No, I completely agree. But I'd be interested. I don't know exactly what Alan was doing at the age of 42. Which is what you are now. He was probably the controller of BBC
He was,
too.
yeah.
He was a very young controller. But had he thought, I'd like to leave the BBC and start my own, become an entrepreneur, it would have been he wouldn't have done it. He wouldn't have done it. The opportunities weren't there in the same way, and he was a BBC person.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting sign of the time that you, at that age, even though you're such an important figure on the BBC, present so many things.
I mean, I'm really not. I know it's a weird thing. I'm really not. Can I just say one thing? And this is not me speaking against myself, but can I just say I'm really not. I mean, look, I'm lucky enough. When you get lucky enough to sit behind a microphone on the Today programme or we did University Challenge, I've got a thing which is first do no harm. Okay, these are absolute jewels, and don't cock them up. Respect them and respect the audience. There are about 2 million people that watch University Challenge, linear and digital, every week. These people love the show. I am honestly, it's not me being humble. You'll think I'm
but in a way,
bullshitting
that's
it.
not the
I'm
point
just
I'm
literally
making,
sitting on the
Amol.
shoulder of giants.
Yeah, I'm not. But that's not the point I'm making. Is that in your generation, you think I can continue on the BBC presenting these wonderful programs, but I can also get out into the big, wide,
Open
modern
waters of the internet.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
That's the difference. And I think that's a sign of the times. It might be, about you as an individual as well.
And there are trade-offs, which is the scariness, and there's maybe a potential lack of loss of profile. I would say that one thing to think about is not, you can think about the loss of profile, which is like Jeremy Paxman, the great Jeremy Paxman, a hero of mine, mentor of mine, friend of mine, very sadly not very well at the moment, but he wouldn't have gone off and done this thing because when he was on Newsnight, it was getting watched by huge numbers of people. And there would be this kind of thing of like, oh, if you leave the Today programme, which by the way, it's 5.6, the Today programme, sorry, I'm going to say it, the Today programme, the real story about the Today programme, which no one will write because why would they, is that it's not how many people it's lost, it's how many people it's retained. The Today programme is 5.6 million different people, extraordinary influence, amazing editorial standards. And it's kind of mad to give that up in some ways and give up the chance to interview Ted Sarandos and Gordon Brown. I would say that, there's a different kind of following that you can create and a community you can create online with a much more intimate, reciprocal, one-to-one connection or one-to-many
and that's
connection.
where you're going.
Yeah.
Well, look, good luck with it. And we've taken up enough, probably too much of your time.
Taking up too much of your time.
One thing
I
we've
could talk
gathered
to you
is
for
that you're a
hours.
very busy man. So that's all for this week. Thanks for listening. Huge thanks to Amol for being with us. Any questions about the world of television you wanted to ask, send them our way. We'd love to hear from you.
You can get them on our socials, or just email us, or just what the fuck else do we do?
We're even better.
Don't
Why
look
not
so bored,
subscribe?
Jimmy. God's sake.
This is the bit I hate
say
doing.
it, say it like you mean it. Say it with passion.
This is
Get out
why.
of the car.
This
Get
is
out-
why I was never
Jimmy,
employed by the
Jimmy,
Today programme
Jimmy,
because
just-
halfway through.
Take some direction from a proper
I'll do it.
Go on.
You can get in touch with us on the Insider Podcast through various social forms. So you.
You see,
Listen,
he can't improvise.
on that-
It turns out.
He is really good. Honestly, if you want to invest in Amol,
we found
he's
him
really
out
good.
at last. We found him out at
No,
last.
you can invest, but you can't have any equity. Get in touch with the Insider Podcast. Jimmy and Peter Fincham, who've got between them 150 years of experience.
Yeah,
at the
all
top
right,
of
all right.
British television.
Don't
Would
lay
love
on.
to answer your questions. I might get in touch with a voice note. You can contact them on Instagram, LinkedIn,
YouTube, whatever.
all the
Pigeon
beloved.
post, everything.
Wherever
Just
you get
search
your
for the
podcasts.
Insider Podcast.
Or
The usual blurb.
Or you can even watch us if you've got the nerve on our YouTube
you're
channel.
a real masochist.
Bye.
All right, thank you.